floodwaters pushing levees to their breaking points.
Ian, a monster storm that strengthened quickly overnight.
At least 77 now dead from the worst storm to batter the state in decades.
A state of emergency in Puerto Rico.
Disaster in Puerto Rico.
Nearly the entire island is in the dark. There has been catastrophic flooding and mudslides.
If ever the cavalry was needed, it is now, and it is in New Orleans.
Even before Hurricane Katrina, the history of New Orleans was rife with segregation, with white, wealthy households settling on naturally higher ground, forcing low-income and people of color to live on the low-lying back swamp. Housing and development efforts following the New Orleans hurricane of 1915 established a racially divided city. Various infrastructure projects maintained this segregation, including the 1960s Claiborne Avenue Highway construction, which completely divided a flourishing hub of Black economic and cultural life, destroying 500 homes in the process. The effects and recovery efforts of Hurricane Katrina amplified the existing disparities in New Orleans. The lower Ninth Ward, comprised almost exclusively of Black and low-income people, is below sea level and suffered some of the worst damage when the levees and canals failed. Poorer communities and communities of color were 3 times more likely to lose their homes and become displaced than wealthy, predominantly white communities. Compounding on the disproportionate damages that Hurricane Katrina inflicted on communities of color is the inequality in disaster response and recovery efforts. FEMA's National Advisory Council has since admitted government disaster aid exacerbated inequality. For example, FEMA had significantly fewer on-site trailers in the lower Ninth Ward compared to white neighborhoods in New Orleans. Even a decade later, in 2015, the white population was 10,000 lower than pre-Katrina levels, whereas the Black population had decreased by 100,000 people.
If you have eyes, you will see that it is obvious and it is blatant, and this type of pattern takes place intentionally and systematically, in my opinion. And so, yes, the gentrification, yes, the intentional pushing out of the natives and replacing it with a population of people who had the means to take advantage of an opportunity.
Katrina damaged the project so bad that we were able to roll it down and rebuild housing.
I remember just being stunned. They knocked down the magnolia, the melpomene, and the callium, and made it look prettier. You could tell it wasn't gonna never be the same.
In crisis management, a disaster hits a community as it is, not as we want it to be. All the things that were wrong with that community at the time of the hurricane hitting will be exacerbated in both its impact and then, of course, in the response. And people need to remember, Hurricane Katrina came to New Orleans as a Category 3. It actually hit other states as Category 5s, but they did not have, I think, the systemic racial issues that New Orleans have. What we have discovered nearly, 20 years later, is that the recovery also has that racism built into it, although there is beginning to be at least conversation about how recoveries are done better.
Tort litigation was attempted as a way to redistribute and rectify disparities following Katrina. In 2006, property owners in the Press Park neighborhood sued the Housing Authority of New Orleans, the city, and the New Orleans Parish School District for exposure to soil infused with lead and other toxic chemicals. The plaintiffs alleged that the defendants negligently constructed their neighborhood and elementary school over a former landfill containing hazardous waste. The damages to Hurricane Katrina worsened exposure even further. Although plaintiffs won over $100 million in damages for emotional distress and property damage, an appellate judge later reduced these damages by 50%, claiming that they were excessive.
I do believe that the tort can fit into that box. I think it should fit into that box because people of color are getting bombed more than the rest of us. It's an absolute fact. Nobody can deny it. But under the tort scheme, right, you get an amount of money that satisfies the amount of your injury. Well, obviously, that's not going to solve the problem.
As of March 2022, 16 years after the complaint was filed, the remaining damages are still being withheld, pending administrative review by a special master. On a more optimistic note, grassroots community-led initiatives have achieved more concrete results. For example, in the Holy Cross neighborhood, a multiracial coalition of residents rebuilt infrastructure and facilitated the return of thousands to the lower 9th Ward. Holy Cross leaders fought to hold public actors accountable for prioritizing corporations over community members in recovery efforts. This is much like what tort law seeks to do regarding resource distribution, but with arguably more tangible benefits than cases like Johnson. Such efforts demonstrate that when institutions fail, community members can come together to seek justice.
We find in studying successful recoveries, the best recoveries are ones that are not top down from some legal federal regime, but are actually community-based, in which the community decides how it best can protect itself.
Disaster is disempowering. I mean, you lose access to your home, to your community, to your church, to your pharmacy, to your neighbors, to the people you go to school with, all of that. The absence of individual power that low-income people, working class people, and elderly disabled folks, that they don't have access to the financial power or political power that people with resources have. What they had was the opportunity to organize others of the directly impacted.
Before even Katrina, there has been this fervor, this fire, this strength inside of this neighborhood. We are on a foundation of some powerful community organizers and movers just in this neighborhood.
The best thing you could do as an organizer, I believe, is to work yourself out of a job. That is the purpose of an organizer, that you work yourself out of a job. And if there are folk in the 9th Ward who have decided they want to do something and move something, then that's a celebratory moment.
Studies from Yale and MIT show that climate change has and is making hurricanes stronger. Climate change phenomena include increasing hurricane rainfall, wind speeds, and reach. It is important to remember that these existing and additional damages will disproportionately harm people of color. This makes both tort law and community advocacy all the more necessary for future disasters.